Since civilization began, humans have had a place to call home. But there was a time where there wasn't a place we could call home. As far as we know, humans have led a nomadic life since the first human species evolved. A life of harmony with the rhythms of nature, where every day is a blank canvas. In this video, I want to explore the beauty and the hardships of this lifestyle, as well as how it compares to the modern way of life. Enjoy. Hunter-gathering is a lifestyle that relies on hunting animals and foraging for wild vegetation. Before the hunter-gatherer lifestyle, it is proposed that hominins lived a scavenger lifestyle, by either waiting for predators to finish and then feeding on the scraps, or scaring predators off in large groups, which is called kleptoparasitism. Because hunter-gatherers did not rely on agriculture, they used mobility as a survival strategy. The hunter-gatherer lifestyle required access to a large area of land between 7 and 500 square miles. This made establishing long-term settlements impractical, resulting in a nomadic lifestyle. Hunter-gatherer groups tended to range in size, from an extended family to a larger band of no more than 100 people. With the beginnings of the Neolithic Revolution about 12,000 years ago, when agriculture practices were first developed, some groups abandoned hunter-gatherer practices to establish permanent settlements that could provide for much larger populations. However, many hunter-gatherer behaviours persisted until modern times. Over the last 500 years, the population of hunter-gatherers has declined dramatically. Today, very few exist, with the Hadza people of Tanzania being one of the last groups to live in this tradition. There seems to be a stigma around hunter-gatherer societies. Some often think of hunter-gatherers as primitive, but this, of course, is not the case. And some hunter-gatherer cultures will actually surprise you by how sophisticated they really are. One example of hunter-gatherer sophistication is Göbekli Tepe, a beautifully crafted structure of T-shaped pillars with tales of wonder and origin etched into the stone. I've mentioned Göbekli Tepe countless times throughout my channel, and I plan on doing a much more in-depth video on the site in the future. Not much is known about the people that built this elegant site, but it's believed that they were hunter-gatherers. Not only were they hunter-gatherers, but evidence seems to indicate that multiple hunter-gatherer cultures from beyond the local area came together in harmony to build this significant structure. This signifies the ability to peacefully communicate and cooperate with people of other tribes. It could also suggest that these groups of hunter-gatherers spoke the same language, meaning that there may be a link between these people. Evidence indicates that the inhabitants of Göbekli Tepe lived in villages for at least part of the year. Tools such as grinding stones and mortar and pestles found at the site have been analysed and suggest considerable cereal processing. This means that the inhabitants may have domesticated early forms of grain. But this doesn't indicate an agricultural society, but simply the beginning of the transition to one that would have taken many generations. Archaeological sites such as Karana 5 in Jordan and Ohalo 2 in Israel show that hunter-gatherers were living in semi-sedentary camps for large parts of the year, meaning that around 20,000 years ago, some hunter-gatherers became more sedentary without ever necessarily moving into agriculture. Going back to Göbekli Tepe, we see a prime example of the enhanced culture that hunter-gatherers were capable of. And even though hunter-gatherers don't stay in one location for more than a year, they still had plenty of time to develop their creativity and rituals, as seen in Göbekli Tepe. Specialized hunting techniques are also prominent in hunter-gatherer societies, and is where much of this technology was not only invented, but improved upon. Fish hooks, the bow and arrow, harpoons, and more domestic tools like bone and ivory needles are but a few examples. These more specialized tools enabled them to widen their diet and create more effective clothing and shelter as they moved about in search of food. This also meant that hunter-gatherer societies could flourish in almost every environment on Earth. In the Arctic, 4,000 years ago, hunter-gatherers roamed, hunting whales, sleeping in tents, creating songs and carving art into masks. These people were labelled the Paleo-Eskimos. They were very sophisticated, managing to hunt species from the largest family of mammals to ever roam the earth, whales. Evidence for whale hunting occurs as early as 4,000 years ago in the form of DNA. Without the presence of specific whale hunting weapons, it's hard to know for sure. It is possible, however, to kill a whale using just a spear. If you strike it in the precise area just below the flipper. Thus, some scientists who study early Inuit culture argue that these people were hunting unsuspecting whales as soon as they arrived in the Arctic 5,000 years ago. When you take into consideration that the oldest harpoon is 90,000 years old, then it doesn't seem outside the realm of possibility to suggest this. We also have to take into consideration that it's extremely unlikely that humans had many interactions with whales prior to this, so we should treat humans as an invasive species. Spirituality was very prominent in hunter-gatherer societies around the world. As we discussed earlier, Göbekli Tepe is a blinding example of this. In northern Norway, a people called the Sami lived a nomadic life, travelling the coast, hunting and fishing. Sami tribes had a shaman, who functioned as a medicine man or a spiritual guide. On the night of winter solace, for instance, the shaman would gather several hallucinogenic mushrooms called Amanita muscaria, or flyalgic. A bite or two would launch him into a spiritual journey on which he could traverse spiritual dimensions. They are truly toxic, but they become less potent when they are dried out. The shaman would make use of the Amanita muscaria's psychoactive effects to perform healing rituals, using the mushroom as a drug to induce a spiritual experience, enabling the shaman to act as an intermediary between the spirit and human world, bringing gifts of healing and problem solving. In fact, psychedelics have been used all over the world for spiritual purposes by hunter-gatherer tribes. The Pygmies in Central Africa use the root bark of the iboga tree, and many tribes in the Amazon take ayahuasca. This highlights that spirituality was prominent in hunter-gatherer societies, again, showing just how sophisticated these cultures were. Is a hunter-gatherer lifestyle good for the environment and good for us? Some people may have a vague idea that hunter-gatherers would pack up and move every few days or weeks, But that isn't true. As mentioned earlier, the time a hunter-gatherer tribe stays in one spot varies. The Hadza from Tanzania, which are a group of modern hunter-gatherers, create mobile camps which they move on from every 2 to 3 months, reacting to the movements of animals and the seasonality of water and plants. In hotter, harsher conditions, humans may migrate more often, as herds of prey would migrate to find new sources of water. In colder conditions, prey migration is a little more predictable, so hunter-gatherers would often migrate back to the same regions, as that's where the herd of prey would migrate seasonally. In truth, hunter-gatherers will migrate as resources become scarce. For coastal hunter-gatherers, this wouldn't mean moving to new environments, but simply moving up and down the coast. Because of this lifestyle and need for large areas of land, if everyone today was to resort to a hunter-gathering lifestyle, there simply wouldn't be enough room with sufficient resources to support our current population. Hunter-gatherers know that they live off finite resources. They must never take more from one place in a year than can be replaced naturally in the next. This means that no one is allowed to acquire too much of anything: food, possessions, power, as this may upset the balance not only of the group but also of the environment. So hunter-gatherers must not only live in harmony with themselves but also with their surroundings. It's clear that this lifestyle is much more beneficial for the environment and surrounding wildlife, as large areas of land aren't destroyed and reformed for housing or farmland. But how is it beneficial to us, not just physically, but mentally? First of all, let's talk about the physical benefits. Modern life has many benefits: transport, comfy furniture, smartphones, TV, the internet, dentistries, and advanced medicine. Our bodies show sign of responding positively to modern life. In almost every part of the world, we are much taller than we used to be. We also live much longer, with life expectancy inching towards 80 in many wealthy countries, while everyone thinks ancient humans usually died in their 20s. But this isn't necessarily true. If life expectancy in ancient Greece and Rome was anything to go by, then early city life was brutal, killing off its inhabitants by the age of 30. If we are to compare ourselves to those city dwellers, then our life expectancy is undoubtedly much greater. Life expectancy for early humans varied hugely, but was in the region of 25 years. This is the single most common reason for rejecting ideas that look at previous incarnations of humanity for guidance on, for example, how we might live a healthier life. Out on the savannah, early humans were regularly exposed to danger. The world was changing quickly, and drought or famine could strike at any moment, but despite their life expectancy, it's unlikely that a significant number of early humans died in their 20s. While the threats from violent encounters with predators, prey, or other tribes were significant, 25 as a number is utterly misleading. The problem is in the maths. When talking about life expectancy in hunter-gatherers, what they are really talking about is life expectancy at birth. Today in the UK and the US, infant mortality rates are well below 1%. So to speak of an average age of death makes perfect sense. Those numbers really do tell us how long on average the people in that community live. For hunter-gatherer communities, we need a different mathematical model, because without healthcare, infant mortality rates could be in the region of 20 to 40%. If nearly half of the group dies in infancy and the other half live well into their early 50s, that yields a mean life expectancy of 25. Misleading and not in the least helpful for telling us about how long these people lived. In hunter-gatherer groups, life was and is undoubtedly hard, but their lifespan was not as short as the numbers press us to think. If you were a hunter-gatherer and you made it into adolescence, there was a strong likelihood that you would live a long and healthy life. not so different from modern humans. Everyone knows that neither group is experiencing the best conditions for longevity. The top 10 causes of death in wealthy countries are dominated by metabolic disorders and cancers, nearly all of which have strong associations with the lower levels of physical activity in the country. The multi-billion-pound healthcare industry that supports modern lifestyles only buys people in wealthy countries a few extra years. Modern life does have many benefits, but it encourages us to use transport, sit in a chair at work, or watch TV for extended periods. We increasingly must turn to medicine for solutions because of these habits, coupled with the heavily processed and easy food, which are killing hundreds of millions of us each year. With 70% of people in the US on prescription drugs and 50% in the UK, it seems that as lifespan inches upwards, disease is skyrocketing. The irony is that many advances in modern medicine are firefighting those very problems that modern life itself has created. It's a hard point to conclude, and it seems to be that there is no definite answer here. On one side, there is a life filled with convenience and prosperity, whereas on the flip side, there is a life filled with fulfillment, a deep connection to the earth we live on, and a life that requires a very high level of fitness, which we know goes hand in hand with mental health. That brings me on to my next point. Is this lifestyle better for the human mind? Hunter-gatherers can help us understand the conditions that children may be psychologically adapted to, because we lived as hunter-gatherers for 95% of our evolutionary history. Paying greater attention to hunter-gatherer childhoods may help economically developed countries improve education and well-being. Researchers acknowledge that children living in hunter-gatherer societies live in a very different environment and circumstance than those in developed countries. They also stress that hunter-gatherer children invariably face many difficulties that are not experienced in developed countries, and, therefore, caution that these children should not be idolized. Drawing on their own observations of the Bayaka people in the Congo and the extensive research of anthropologists studying other hunter-gatherer societies, researchers highlight major differences in the ways in which hunter-gatherer children are cared for compared to their peers in developed countries. Despite increasing uptake of baby carers in developed countries, levels of physical contact with infants remains far higher in hunter-gatherer societies. In Botswana, for instance, 10 to 20-week-year-old Kung infants are in physical contact with someone for around 90% of daylight hours, and almost 100% of crying bouts are responded to, almost always with comforting or nursing. Scalding is extremely rare. The study in question points out that this exceptionally attentive childcare is made possible because of the major role played by non-parental caregivers, or alloparents, which is far rarer in developed countries where mothers are often isolated and families consist of 1 to 2 adults. In many hunter-gatherer societies, alloparenting provides almost half of the child's care. A previous study found that in the Republic of Congo, Effie infants have 14 alloparents a day by the time they are 18 weeks old, and are passed between caregivers 8 times an hour. Parents now have much less childcare support from their family and social networks than would likely have been the case during most of our evolutionary history. Such differences seem likely to create the kind of evolutionary mismatch that could be harmful to both caregivers and children. The availability of other caregivers can reduce the negative impacts of stress within the nuclear family and the risk of maternal depression, which has knock-on effects for the child's well-being and cognitive development. This study emphasizes that alloparenting is a core human adaptation, contradicting intensive mothering narratives, which emphasize that mothers should use their maternal instincts to manage childcare alone. The study seems to indicate that communal living in hunter-gatherer societies results in a very high ratio of available caregivers to infants and toddlers, which can exceed 10 to 1. In hunter-gatherer societies, children play a significantly bigger role in providing care to infants and toddlers. In some communities, they begin providing some childcare from the age of 4 and are capable of sensitive caregiving, and it is common to see older but still pre-adolescent children looking after infants. In developed countries, children are busy with schooling and may have less opportunity to develop caregiving competence. However, we should at least explore the possibility that older siblings could play a greater role in supporting their parents, which might also enhance their own social development. The study also points out that instructive teaching is rare in hunter-gatherer societies, and infants primarily learn via observation and imitation. From around the age of 2, hunter-gatherer children spend large portions of their day in mixed-age playgroups without adult supervision. There, they learn from one another, acquiring skills and knowledge via highly active play practices and exploration. Foraging skills are very different to those required to make a living in market economies, and classroom teaching is certainly necessary to learn the latter. But children may possess certain psychological learning adaptations that can be practically harnessed in some aspects of their schooling. When peer and active learning can be incorporated, they have been shown to improve motivation and performance and reduce stress. If children are in fact adapted to highly active and explorative learning, the associated psychobiological dispositions could be a factor that contributes to the incidence of ADHD. Several of the DSM-5 criteria for ADHD refer to disruption in schooling, and physical activity interventions have been shown to improve numerous executive functions among students. Classroom schooling is often at odds with the modes of learning typical of human evolutionary history. It is passive and sedentary, teacher-led via instruction, separates children by age and ability, and involves high-pressure assessments that can precipitate mental health problems. It's hard to say for sure, but it seems to be that human children are much more adapted for life as a hunter-gatherer, and it may be that this is engraved some way in our DNA from a lifestyle that our ancestors have lived for hundreds of thousands of years. As I mentioned previously, mental health is impacted by many things, but two vital components are diet and exercise. In this respect, hunter-gatherers are surely superior. Before we look at the link between diet and mental health, let's look at some of the physical impacts our diets can have. Hunter-gatherers, in terms of endurance and mobility, are much more athletic than even modern-day athletes. This is because of not only their lifestyle, but their diet. The paleo diet is a diet adopted by many people in the modern age with the aim to eat more like hunter-gatherers did thousands of years ago. The idea behind it is to stay away from heavily processed foods that contain lots of additives that cause disease and eat more clean foods. The hunter-gatherer diet focuses on foods that are caught, hunted, foraged, and gathered on land or at sea. It is characterized by wild meats, fish, berries, fruits, nuts, seeds, tubers, and vegetables. They're free of added hormones, genetic modifications, and other biochemical manipulations in widespread use in food production today. Many of the health benefits of the hunter-gatherer diet are rooted in its influence over the human microbiome. Modern diets have curtailed microbial diversity, whereas populations that still consume a hunter-gatherer diet have shown to possess robust, healthy, well-diversified microbiomes. Establishing a healthy microbiome begins in infancy with the first foods offered. However, the microbiome of a child continues to mature and change over time. It was previously believed that this microbiome was fairly mature by 3 years of age, but recent studies have challenged that theory, including a study by the American Society of Microbiology, which showed rapid changes in the microbiome of children up to age 7 when they visited a village in the rainforest and exchanged their traditional urban diet for the villagers' hunter-gatherer style diet. These changes were not noted in the adults of this study, indicating that a child's microbiome is more fluid and more easily influenced by dietary changes. In this same study, after only 16 days of consuming a hunter-gatherer style diet, a survey of samples from multiple body sites, including fecal, nasal, and skin samples, revealed microbial populations that were more closely resembled to those of native village children. A diversified microbiome is important to a child's future health. Early development of inflammatory bowel disease, including Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, as well as colorectal cancer, is rising. The incidence of IBD peaks in young adulthood, and its prevalence continues to rise in children. The gut microbiome is a key player in the development of these inflammatory intestinal conditions, and its composition and diversity during childhood is considered a strong preventative measure against developing IBDs. Further, the microbiome environment during childhood can positively or negatively influence the epigenetic expression of IBDs. Childhood obesity is another serious global childhood health issue rooted in the microbial environment of the child. Insufficient microdiversity in infants and a child's gut alters macronutrient metabolism to favour lipogenesis and decreased normal appetite regulation, and results in low-grade inflammation, all of which may contribute to being overweight and obese. Studies have even confirmed that the gut microbiota composition between obese and non-obese children is significantly different. Like our Paleolithic ancestors, today's hunter-gatherers source their food entirely from the earth and wild animals, and they're physically active for most periods of each day. For instance, the Hadza, a hunter-gatherer group in northeast Tanzania that have been studied for the past 10 years, spend their days walking 8 to 12 kilometers, climbing trees, and digging for root vegetables. Their diet consists of various meats, vegetables, and fruits, as well as a significant amount of honey. In fact, they get 15 to 20% of their calories from honey. The Hadza tend to maintain the same healthy weight, body mass index, and walking speed throughout their entire adult lives. They commonly live into their 60s or 70s, and sometimes even their 80s, possessing very little to no cardiovascular diseases, high blood pressure, or diabetes, that are rapidly growing in prevalence in nearly every corner of the world. See, an inadequate diet can lead to fatigue, impaired decision making, and can slow down reaction time. In fact, a poor diet can actually aggravate and may even lead to stress and depression. One of the biggest health impairments in today's society is the reliance on processed foods. These foods are high in flours and sugar and train the brain to crave more of them, rather than the nutrient-rich foods such as fruits and vegetables. A lot of the processed foods we eat are highly addictive and stimulate the dopamine centers in our brain, which are associated with pleasure and reward. In order to stop craving unhealthy foods, you've got to stop eating those foods. You actually start to change the psychology in the brain, and when you pull added sugars and refined carbohydrates from your diet, you start to see effects on mood and mental health. Sugar and processed foods can lead to inflammation throughout the body and brain, which may contribute to mood disorders, including anxiety and depression. When we're feeling stressed or depressed, it's often processed foods we reach for in search of a quick pick-me-up. During busy or difficult periods, a cup of coffee stands in for a complete breakfast, and fresh fruits and vegetables are replaced with high-fat, high-calorie fast foods. According to the American Dietetic Association, people tend to either eat too much or too little when depressed or under stress. Eat too much and you find yourself dealing with sluggishness and weight gain. Eat too little and the resulting exhaustion makes this a hard habit to break. In either case, poor diet during periods of stress and depression only make matters worse. This cycle is a vicious one, but it can be overcome. Researchers continue to prove that you are what you eat, most recently by exploring the strong connection between our intestines and brain. Our gut and brain are physically linked via the vagus nerve, and the two are able to send messages to one another. While the gut is able to influence emotional behavior in the brain can also alter the type of bacteria living in the gut. According to the American Psychological Association, gut bacteria can produce an array of neurochemicals that the brain uses for the regulation of psychological and mental processes, including mood. It's believed 95% of the body's supply of serotonin, a mood stabilizer, is produced by gut bacteria. Stress is thought to suppress beneficial gut bacteria. From this, we can conclude that people who eat responsible portions of healthy, wholesome foods and exercise regularly, like the Hadza, generally enjoy a better and healthier life than those who overeat, consume processed foods, and lead a sedentary life. It's definitely worth noting that hunter-gatherers have a varied diet depending on where the tribe is in the world and the environment they live in. Some tribes in hotter climates may eat more sugar and fibre, whereas tribes located in colder climates may eat more protein and fat. When considering mental health, it's also worth noting socialization. As social animals, socializing amongst groups of people is vital to a positive life. In the modern world, we find ourselves in the most unusual situation. Never before have humans been able to connect with people on the other side of the world. But with social media, we find ourselves both closer and further away from each other. What I mean by this is that with social media, we can connect with each other, forming and maintaining relationships with people across the world. But the consequence of this is taking us out of the here and now. In order to connect with people online, we must sacrifice our time and look at our phones or computers. Think of when you've been out for a meal with a group of friends or your partner, and one of them is always on their phone, stopping them from interacting with the people they are present with. In hunter-gatherer societies, one may argue that they live a much more beneficial social life. They always live in the present, and the fact that they live with their friends and extended family means they have more closely knit bonds. Sexual relationships could also be viewed as more authentic. They watched, they listened, they smiled, they reacted, they grew on one another, they stayed in close proximity to one another, then found that life was much better with the other person, and that they both complemented each other. Everything felt better, worked better. Eventually, they became mentally and physically attached, monogamous even though part of a larger tribe, loyal to each other, trusting each other, empowering each other. Many relationships in modern-day hunter-gatherer societies are monogamous and not necessarily male-dominated, highlighting that this is how relationships formed in our ancient ancestors. It is difficult to make a direct comparison between the happiness of hunter-gatherer societies and modern people, as the concept of happiness is subjective and can vary greatly between individuals and cultures. However, some studies suggest that hunter-gatherer societies may have had a greater sense of community and less stress related to material possessions and social expectations. On the other hand, modern society offers access to a wide range of resources and opportunities that may contribute to overall happiness for some individuals. It seems evident that whichever lifestyle is better is entirely opinion-based. Hunter-gatherers may generally be happier and have a more meaningful life, but modern societies seem to have higher potential for an individual to achieve what the hunter-gatherers deem impossible. Not only that, but hunter-gatherers seem to be in the peak physical human form, whereas modern societies live for longer. There are benefits and consequences on both sides. One thing that we do know, however, is that hunter-gatherers had a better life than early agricultural communities. They lived a life more suited to the physical form and had much more leisure time and enjoyed a much more nutritious and tasty diet. There are, of course, benefits that outweigh the hunter-gatherer lifestyle, otherwise we wouldn't have slowly transitioned away from it. See, an early agricultural lifestyle wasn't so beneficial to the individual, but was beneficial to the future of his and her species, and it is this that drove us to adopt it. An agricultural life was less adventurous. They stayed in one spot for their whole lives and rarely, sometimes never, discovered or experienced new lands. Instead, they wake up, maintain and harvest the same patch of land, occasionally go out on a hunt and spend what little time they have with their tribe, and go back to the same sleeping spot all throughout their lives. The agricultural life requires much less social interaction and cooperation than even life in modern society, yet alone a hunter-gatherer one. If you were to ask any ambitious individual what life they would prefer, I think you'd find more often than not they pick the hunter-gatherer lifestyle. I know I would. The hunter-gatherer lifestyle slowly started to change 10 to 12,000 years ago, when humans first began to domesticate early grains in the Fertile Crescent. The available agriculture depended on what part of the globe humans called home. Plants were individually domesticated all over the world. People started to build more permanent structures like stone near where the crops grew. They built more communal buildings like the Tower of Jericho. While we don't know the Tower of Jericho's exact purpose, we do know that it likely had something to do with community gatherings. They eventually learned how to carry and regrow these crops, as well as what conditions to grow them in. People still live a hunter-gatherer lifestyle today, but with threats to their homelands, language, and cultural practices, young people from some hunter-gatherer groups are leaving their clans to go to college and university. There, most learn about either medicine or law, with many returning to their homelands to act as doctors, nurses, and legal advisors for their own people in order to protect their way of life for generations to come. All life on Earth lives in the real world. We, as modern humans, don't. We live in this world of materialism that we have created. It upsets me sometimes to speak to people that have no clue about real life, how animals live, where our species came from, the natural cycle of life. You wouldn't think our species has lived on this planet for thousands of years. We've lost our connection to the earth. I'm not saying we should all drop our technology and run into the wild. Technology is beautiful. I wouldn't be able to pursue my passion and share these videos with you if it wasn't for technology. But I think there's a lot we can learn from our past and people who still live this ancient lifestyle. I think, as animals on this planet, we should take a moment to find gratitude in nature. Unplug yourself from the digital world and take a walk. Notice what you feel, hear, or smell. This is something I think everyone must both understand and engage in. What I've personally taken from this is that so much of life is a mystery. Stop worrying about the past and the future, and for just this short time, be in the present, the here and now, and let this give an understanding to our hearts. Thanks for watching this video. I feel like covering this subject is very important so we can learn from this beautiful way of life and try and use what we have learned to benefit both ours and the future generations' life. As you can probably tell, I loved covering this subject and would love to know your thoughts. Why do you think depression and mental illness is so prevalent in modern society? What do you think about the hunter-gatherer lifestyle? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.